is of significant note throughout the land of these sometimes divided and sometimes united peoples. Before we explore the locations on this map, I wanted to give the briefest of histories I possibly can of the 3 empires of men which have dominated this province in the history of Tamriel. Before man or Mer inhabited Tamriel, it is widely accepted that the continent was only populated by beast men, such as the Argonians and Khajiit. In the book The Father of the Niben, Topal the pilot recorded that he encountered bird men in the ancient jungles of Siridil during the Merethic era. Long after that, the Aelids ruled over the lands they called Sirad, where modern Tamrielics get the name Siridil, and the Aelids enslaved the Nedic, or human, populations, and turned into brutal oppressors. Eventually, a slave woman fought back against her lords and led a great rebellion against them. The slave woman, Alessia as she is now remembered, declared herself empress after her forces won the White Gold Tower, and she made the ancient city of Sancrator her holy city, where Akatosh is said to have blessed her with the Amulet of Kings. Alessia had one son, Belharza, the first Minotaur, and as mother and son they make up 2 of the 3 known rulers of the First Empire. Before the introduction of the Order of Maruk, when Alessia established herself as empress, her people needed a religion, but not one with too close of a resemblance to the old elven pantheon. Therefore, she combined the Nordic pantheon of her allies to the north and the old elvish pantheon to create the temple of the 8 divines, which, although fell out of popularity at times, remained the most commonly practiced religion in Siridil into the 4th era. Around the 2nd century of the 1st era is when the Alessian doctrines became popular among the Nibonese people of eastern Siridil. Since earning their freedom, many of the people of Siridil were questioning their previous religious beliefs and began to look towards monotheism over the more common practice of polytheism. According to the Pocket Guide to the Empire 1st edition, it started in the coastal jungle of what is now the Colovian West, where a prophet named Maruk had spoken to the enlightened one, Saint Alessia, began to question the validity of elven rule. These sentiments led to an increasingly abstract and unknowable depiction of a single god. The Alessians were wise enough to realize that they had to incorporate the ancient polytheistic elements into their new religion for it to find a wide acceptance. The divine aspects worshipped by the various humans and ordinary Empire's sworn protectors, which would eventually evolve into the Blades. Imperial culture was heavily influenced by Akaviri culture from this point onward. Akavir itself is a very, very large continent, and there are many Akaviri cultures, but this one, the Seishi, or Snake People, T-S-A-E-S-C-I, Seishi, or Snake People of Akavir were the particular customs and architecture which the Imperials adopted, particularly the Nibonese. Riemann's empire went on to conquer the entirety of Tamriel. They never got Morowind. And once again the people of Siridil reached another height of power. During this time, the position of potentate arose within the empire's ranks, and this position was often filled by one of the Seishi. Much of the society that Riemann I established in the late First Era influenced the society of the Third Empire. Riemann I died in First Era 2762, and his son Riemann II continued in his father's footsteps, but was much more impacted by the potentate, whose power and position only seemed to be growing. In First Era 2920, when Riemann III was in power, he was assassinated by the Morag Tong, along with all of his heirs, and the Akaviri potentate Versaduce declared he would assume the responsibilities and rulership of the empire, but keep his title of potentate. He also declared, with the ending of the Riemann dynasty, the ending of the First assassinated by the newly formed Dark Brotherhood over the next 2 weeks, 14 days. The Second Empire collapsed, and by the next year it was gone, leading to the Second Imperial Interregnum. A bunch of stuff does happen in Tamriel during the Interregnum. Many people try to declare themselves emperor, but none are dragonborn and therefore have no real claim to the Ruby Throne. Not at this time, at least. Next is the current and Third Empire. The Third Empire was established by the legendary Tiber Septim. In Second Era 854, but it was not as simple as the sentence I have just spoken. The fight for the formation of the Third Empire was bloody and long. The Tiber Wars were a prolonged conflict that ended in the unification of the entirety of Tamriel for the first time in its history under the Septim dynasty of emperors. It is known that Tiber Septim himself rose to power under King Culhwch of Falkreath, though there are several conflicting stories about his origins and name. Regardless, the seemingly agreed-upon event that launched him into such a prominent and powerful figure was when he met King Culhwch's enemy forces, serving as General Tiber Septim or General Talos. From Skyrim and High Rock came the enemy forces, and on the battlefield at Sancredor, around here, it's not on the map. Here mighty Talos used the Thuum to beat back the armies, and the men of Skyrim bowed to him, accepting him as their emperor when they recognized his voice. It was also at Sancredor where Tiber Septim acquired the blessed Amulet of Kings from Riemann's tomb. General Talos and Culhwch took Skyrim, and Culhwch Tiber's forces never really made it to central Argonia, because the swamps of that place make it virtually impossible for anyone who's not an Argonian to travel there safely. But the outer borders of Blackmarsh were very quickly joined with the Empire. There are so few records of the Imperial invasion of elsewhere, but it is said to have been extremely harsh on the catfolk. The Khajiit were never fond of being part of the Second Empire, and were just as resistant to the Third, but they were unfortunately crushed by Tiber's forces and absorbed into the Empire, I believe becoming the Confederacy of Elsewhere. Morowind had yet to be conquered by any of the past empires of Siridil, famously being the only province to not be part of the Second Empire. Tiber Septim was well aware of this fact and was rightfully hesitant to invade Morowind due to the great power of the three living gods, Sotha, Sil, Al-Malexia, and of course, Vivek. But there were two things Tiber wished for, which Morrowind could provide him. There was a huge source of ebony. Morrowind is rich with it, and that would be used to repair the Cyrodiilic economy. And the Numidium, a huge automaton of great power, which would be used as a tool to conquer the Somerset Isles, the home of the Altmer or High Elves. After Tiber's army destroyed the capital city of Morrowind, Mournhold, which is always being destroyed, the tribunal, particularly Vivek, knew that it would be very difficult to fight the might of the Empire, as well as the rising threat of Dagoth-Ur, which prevented them from using their full divine powers. And Tiber was still hesitant to take out the tribunal and Dagoth-Ur. Therefore, both parties agreed to form a treaty. Some accounts say Vivek directly offered the Numidium to Tiber. In exchange, Morrowind would remain entirely self-governed, something which no city-states of Bravil and Leowen began to seek independence, the council appointed an Ibonese man to rule, as they preferred him over the popular Colovian lord, Titus Mede, who was very loudly seeking the throne. In 4th Era 22, Titus Mede captured the Imperial City and crowned himself emperor. He proved himself by retaking Leowen, Bravil, and Hammerfell. Unfortunately, things were looking difficult for the Third Empire, especially following the Oblivion crisis. Black Marsh had been lost since the crisis itself. Valenwood and elsewhere became part of the Third Aldmeri Dominion under the Thalmor of Somerset. Morowind was facing disaster again after the eruption of Red Mountain, and had never really rejoined the Empire. During this time was when Titus Mede II ascended to the throne in 4th Era 168. He remained strong, but soon the Great War broke out in 4th Era 171, whose events we'll discuss later on. With this war, Hammerfell was once again lost, and only Skyrim, High Rock, and Siridil remained. By 4th Era 201, and even then, tensions were very high, especially in Skyrim. A very long intro, I know, but the history of Siridil has very much defined the many, many events throughout Tamriel's history, and I felt it would be a disservice to not brief you on the complex past of this nation. As we go on, I'll get you more acquainted with the general geography of whichever region we're discussing. That way we can identify where we are based on nearby significant geographical features, such as lakes, rivers, and mountain ranges. Then we'll dive into the counties and cities more deeply. Siridil is also divided into larger regions, such as the Gold Coast or the Great Forest, the Heartlands, but their borders are not clearly defined. The borders of the counties of Siridil are similarly undefined. County Cheydinhal, County Bruma. Unlike the holds of Skyrim, which we have previously explored, and I thought this was a really kind of cool quote from Pocket Guide to the Empire 1st edition. Indeed, if the history of the Nords is the history of humans on Tamriel, then Siridil is the throne Siridil has been nurtured and cultivated by the people of the Niben since before the First Era, and though they have a proclivity toward a mob mindset, they're an intelligent, diplomatic, and charismatic people whose independence and spirit is impossible to break. The first region we'll talk about, of course, must be the Heartlands. The Heartlands. As you can see, there are no real borders which define this here. The Heartlands are the heart of the Heartland. I think I'm so funny. The landscape of the Heartlands is that of grasslands which surround the Imperial City and Lake Rumire. There is so much history involving the Heartlands. I think it may require its own video, and much of the history I cover later on, or have already covered in past videos. So I'll give you a very, very brief history of this area. Before the First Era, and before the elves arrived on Tamriel, the native and presumably now extinct birdmen lived in the tropical rainforests which used to make up the Heartlands. Then the Aelids moved in the middle late Merethic era. They came from Somerset. The Aelids became tyrannical and took the local Nedic tribes, the ancestors of the Imperials, as their slaves. Eventually, the Needs rebelled against the brutal oppressors, and they won, of course. Since that time, in the 3rd century of the First Era, humans have ruled the Heartlands. There is much history between the First Era and the 4th Era, what I call the present in the Elder Scrolls, but like I said, we'll be exploring much of that during the rest of the video. For now, I want to discuss Lake Rumire. At the center of Siridil is Lake Rumire, a huge lake whose waters surround the city Isle and the Imperial City. The lake has 2 rivers which flow from it. The Niben, of course, famously, and the much smaller White Rose River here. Lake Rumire flows out the southwest corner into the upper Niben, and in the southeast flows into the much smaller White Rose River. This bridge here is called Talos Bridge. houses many deceased emperors and nobles of ages past. It is a generally pleasant area, heavily guarded by the Imperial Palace Guard, so as long as you stay out of their way, you'll enjoy this district. The next district is called the Arboretum, and it is located in the southeast of the city, which is made up of botanical gardens and has a statue with each of the divines, with Talos at the center of them all. It is a place of peace and prayer in the otherwise hectic Imperial City. Next is the Temple District in the southwest. This district is home to the Temple of the One being Akatosh, the dragon god, the king of the gods, and, in a way, a patron of the Empire. There are many other cathedrals here as well, such as one dedicated to the goddess Mara, and the district is not only a center of worship for the divines, but a center for the many cults of the Empire. Next is the Talos Plaza District, a residential area that houses some of the most wealthy of the Empire's people. It's home to the Tiber Septim Hotel, the most expensive place to stay in the Imperial City. And another residential area is in the northwest, called the Elven Gardens District, the Market District. People come from all over the city and even outside of Siridil to buy, sell, and trade their wares in this district, making it extremely profitable. Next is the Waterfront District to the southeast, and it serves as the main port for the Imperial City, as well as a cheap residential area. Ships from all across the continent sail up the Niben and come to this district as merchants, sailors, and travelers. The district boasts a large lighthouse controlled by the Imperial Legion, which guides ships on foggy days and at night. which has washed away from the arena, and at some point a clan of vampires found their home underneath. The Arcane University is the last district we'll talk about, and it was the home of the Mages Guild, a long-standing guild of magic users founded in the early Second Era. The Arcane University has been the core of magical learning in Tamriel since the Second Age. Some even claim it replaced the crystal towers of the Somerset Isles as the hub of all magical learning on Tamriel. Before the founding of the Mages Guild, the only organization then closest in aim and structure to what we know today as the Mages Guild was the Sigic Order of the Isle of Artaeum. At the time, magic was something to be learned by individuals, or at most within intimate covens. Mages were, if not actually hermits, usually quite solitary. The founding of the Mages Guild came at a time when the attitude toward who and how people should wield magic was still very much rigid, in the sense that magic should be practiced away from civilized society, or only by masters of the craft. The Sigic Vanis Galerion was of a different attitude. He began to gather mages of all kinds from all around his home of the Somerset Isles, and became infamous for his startling ideas. Galerion proposed to make magical items, potions, and even spells available to any member of the general public who could afford to pay. No longer was magic to be limited either to the aristocracy or intelligentsia. Galerion was taken to the king of First Hold, Rilis XII, the kingdom he was operating out of, and the famed Sigican counselor of many kings of Somerset, Iagesis. His name is just as hard to say as I remember. Galerion was then made to make clear his purpose in forming this band of magic users. Whatever statement he made to these men was not recorded, but it is known that his formal request to form his guild was granted by the king. Once the guild was officially formed, many questioned the security concerns of having magically trained people working with possibly dangerous magical practices in the middle of the city. Thus, the Mages Guild hired a set of guards, but their loyalty to the guild was slightly questionable. Instead, the Order of the Lamp, a group of knights of some brothers of Maruk, priests of Maruk, who took up arms against an anonymous group of devils from the elvish temple of Malada. During the rule of the Aelids, there was a great labyrinthine city built near Lake Caudalis, which was built to further the trial of reaching a Daedric artifact of Mehrunes Dagon. Mehrunes Razor, the city they built, was called Varsabalim, and within it lied the Nefari Vigum, which was erected to test any pilgrim who would come to see if they were worthy of the razor. The Aelids were staunch Daedric worshippers, and believed they held the authority on who should have the chance to prostrate themselves before the Prince of Destruction, to try and earn his razor. As time went on, the Aelid security waned, and an unknown vampire managed to slip through. Then a group of merfolk sent a storm of madness and ruin, and the city seemed to be rid of any who sought to halt anyone from entering to receive the razor. Then, suddenly, Varsabalim was gone. Historic accounts dispute whether it happened through some final safety, a natural cataclysm, or by the touch of the divines themselves. Whatever the cause, history agrees on the result. The mountains of the eastern Niben swallowed Varsabalim, and the Nefari Vigum with it, where has remained hidden since the early days of the First Era. Lake Popad, Lake Popad, is a small lake at the west end of the Corbolo River. The river does not empty into the lake, but it's possible they might have been connected many thousands of years ago. Just north is the city of Cheydinhal. Little else is to be said about this isolated lake, though there is a shrine to Vermina on its northeastern shore. Poppet, Lake Poppet. It's a good trigger word. The Corbolo River, the first major tributary of the Niben that we will talk of. It has its headwaters to the northeast of Lake Poppet, and it has a small tributary of its own called the Reed River, which actually goes further up here into Cheydinhal, but it's not shown on this map. The Reed River is meant to flow from the Vallis Mountains here, through Cheydinhal and down, to meet with the Corbolo and eventually the Niben. The next tributary is the Silverfish River here. It's not as of the Dunmer, and a unique architectural style called half-timber emerged in the city. The first floor of the homes are walled with stone, while the upper floor is made of plaster and wood, and there are all sorts of styles and techniques employed to make each building stand out, while still maintaining a nice city-wide aesthetic. Count Indoris married a Dunmer woman, Lathaza, in the beginning of the 3rd century of the 3rd era, and they had one son, Farwil, who is said to have started a regal order called the Knights of Thorn in the 3rd era 431, which mostly just caused mischief and inconvenience for the city guard, but was brushed off on account of Farwill's father. They were more or less harmless, though. In 3rd era 433, Countess Lathaza was found dead at the bottom of Castle Jaden Hall, and no one knows why. Perhaps it was a bad omen for the coming events, when the Oblivion Gate opened outside the West Gate. Later that year, in accordance with Emperor Uriel VII's death, and the dissolution of the border between Mundus and Oblivion, Farwil gathered what knights he could, 6, and they made their way into the Deathlands. special silk gathering ritual, the resource of which is used to create any manner of vestment or costume. The swishing of this material during normal movement reproduces the resplendent ancestral chorus contained therein. It quickly became a sacred custom among the early Nibonese, which has persisted to the present day. Monks of the higher orders of the cult of the ancestor moth are able to forego the magical ritual needed to enchant this fabric, and indeed prefer instead to wear the moths about the neck and face. They are able to attract the ancestor moths through the application of finely ground bark dust gathered from the gypsy moth's favorite tree, and through the sub-vocalization of certain mantras. They must chant the mantras constantly to maintain skin contact with the ancestor moths, a discipline that they endure for the sake of some cosmic balance. When a monk interrupts these mantras in conversation, for example, the moths burst from him in glorious fashion every time he speaks, only to light back upon his skin when he resumes the inaudible chant. The next region we're going to discuss is the Niboney Valley. I know it's kind of sideways. The Niboney Valley. Colloquially, when referring to the Niboney Valley, Tamrielics are referring generally to the whole of Niboney, the basin and heartlands included. first time during the first Akaviri invasion. Here is the Larsius River. A fairly short river flows from Siridil's border with elsewhere to the east through the city of Baravil and into the Niben Bay. The mouth of this river is said to be heavily polluted with swamp insects and refuse from Bravil by 3rd Era. 433. The Green Road connects Bravil to the Red Ring Road and the Imperial City to the north. Bravil is located in the Nibene Valley in the south of Cyrodiil and is sometimes referred to as the daughter of the Niben. It has a long history, first being inhabited by the mysterious birdmen and possibly the Khajiit, then by the Aelids who lived near the Niben, and then, of course, the Imperials. The Niben then, as now, provided food and transportation, and the village was even more populous than it is today. During the Alessian slave revolt, this region was one of the last to be cleared of Aelids. A man named Teo Braviliastasis was the man who secured the settlement, and therefore it was named Bravil in his honor. By the time of the 3rd Era, Bravil was unfortunately one of the poorest cities in Siridil. I wanted to try and talk about all of the districts in each city, but surprisingly, Bravil is not divided into districts. In the west of the city, though, is the Chapel of Mara, the goddess of love. There was a chapter of the Mages Guild here. Well, it was still running, and there is probably still a chapter of the Fighters Guild here as well. So instead of the districts, we'll talk about one of the most recognizable monuments from Baravil, the Lucky Old Lady statue. A staple of conversation about Bravil is the topic of the Lucky Old Lady statue, an ancient statue that once stood in the city east of the great Chapel of Mara. Whoever was the artist behind the statue is unknown, but there are countless tales surrounding her origin. One famous take from the book The Daughter of the Niben claims that the statue is of a woman who lived in Baravil thousands of years ago. She was born as an illegitimate child of a prostitute, and she was ridiculed during her childhood for not knowing the identity of her father. When she was still young, a priest of Stendar traveled to Bravil, and like a good pious man, he asked the crying child what brought her misery. She responded that she did not know who her father was. The priest replied, "You have where she lived to a content old age. Supposedly, the lucky old lady statue was erected in honor of this benevolent woman, but this story cannot be confirmed. Still, up until 4th Era 188, the people of Bravil and many visitors would come to the lucky lady and ask for her blessing of luck. What knowledge is not privy to much of Bravil's populace is that the lucky old lady statue served as the secret entrance to the crypt of the Night Mother, a sacred location of the Dark Brotherhood hidden beneath the city. The crypt was where the Brotherhood kept the remains of the Night Mother, but by the time of the late 2nd century of the 4th Era, Bravil was a much less lucky town, and the Brotherhood was falling further and further into obscurity every day. In 4th Era 188, during a battle between Bravil's two biggest skooma providers, the lucky old lady statue was destroyed, and only 3 Dark Brotherhood members could be dispatched to protect the crypt of the Night Mother. One, the listener, Alison Dupre, was burned by mage fire. Another, Andronica, slashed to pieces. And the last, Karnag, barely managed to survive and flee to Jadenall with the mighty stone coffin of the Night Mother. The story of the Dark Brotherhood continues, but that's not the story we're here to tell. Since its destruction, it is unknown if there has been any attempt at rebuilding the lucky old lady. But if there are any updates, I'll be sure to keep you informed. I'm sure the spirit and luck of the lady and statue remain in some way in the city of Bravil. When the Great War erupted in Frostfall of year 171 of the 4th Era, the Aldmeri Dominion came from the south in Elsewhere, quickly took the city of Leowin, and soon cut off and besieged Bravil. The siege was broken the next year, as the Aldmeri forces pushed further into Siridil, taking Bravil and Anvil by the end of 4th Era 172. The next year, the Imperial forces of Siridil were strengthened by the armies of Skyrim, but only for a time, as by the end of 173, the Aldmeri forces were up to the walls of the Imperial City. In the 4th Era 174, the Imperial City was sacked by Aldmeri forces. Though the Imperial City was bloodily won back the next year, and the White Gold Concordat assigned, the city of Bravil was under the vengeful rule of the Thalmor for almost 5 years. Next region is Black Wood. The farthest to the south in Siridil and bordering Black Marsh Elsewhere and Black Marsh. The yellow road, I don't think, can you see it up here? I don't think you can. Oh yeah, there you can. The yellow road leads down all the way south to Leowen, directly from the Red Ring Road, but you could also take the Green Road through Morowind crisis itself, it was one of the most influential battles that ended up ending the Daedric invasion, and the hero of Kvatch had to go to every other city to ask for a kind of tribute of men to be sent to back up the armies at the defense of Bravil, at the defense of Bruma. In the north of the city are the guilds, merchants, inns, and other such trades that you would be interested in as a traveler to Siridil. But there are no really distinct districts in Bruma. There is a chapel of Talos located in the south of the city, and the wooden houses of Bruma line the south and east walls. South and east walls. Much of Bruma is made of wood, as it is so abundant in this forested area. Castle Bruma is northwest of the city. It's made of stone and stands out among the many wooden houses and constructions of this mountain city. Actually shown here on this map is the Cloud Ruler Temple. Nearby the city, in the mountains, is the Cloud Ruler Temple, an ancient stronghold of the Blades. This place was built by Raymond Siridil's Akaviri Dragon Guard at the founding of the Second Empire. Since then, it has served the Blades as a headquarters, fortress, and sanctuary. This sacred place serves as a perfect and well-preserved example of Akaviri architecture. The Dragon Guard which built it became the Blades, the Emperor's most important and trusted protectors, but also the servants of the Dragonborn. There are other fortresses across Tamriel, which were safe havens for members of the Blades, but the Cloud Ruler Temple is arguably the most famous. There is also the Sky Haven Temple in Skyrim. It was in the Cloud Ruler Temple that the Blades were said to have hung the swords of those slain protecting the Dragonborn. The temple was a fortress for Martin the Septim and the hero of Kvatch as they went about getting the Amulet of Kings from the mythic dawn. When the Oblivion crisis was resolved and Martin sadly dead, the Blades locked themselves inside the temple, awaiting the next Dragonborn. It is a sad fact that during the Great War, the Thalmor of the Aldemiri Dominion sought out and killed as many and almost all of the Blades throughout Tamriel, as they were the most loyal and dedicated members to keeping the Empire safe, and they were the most outspoken against the dangers of the Thalmor. The Thalmor targeted the Cloud Ruler Temple during the Great War, during which all of the temple's inhabitants were killed, except one. Asilius Polar, who managed to flee to Skyrim, but was still chased to his death by the Thalmor. Also within Bruma is the great Chapel of Talos. Since Bruma has always had a mix of Cyrodiilic religious population and a sect of people who are more closely observe the ancient Nordic pantheon, some view this as very strange in Bruma, but the people here have lived this way for most of the city's history. I personally think that Talos would serve as a kind of connection between the Cyrodiilic people and Skyrim, as the Nords often view Talos as originally Nordic in nature, and some accounts even hold that Talos was originally self-sufficient, hearty, and extremely loyal to one another. Wherever the East would tremble under the weakness of a leader, the Colovians would withdraw onto themselves, always believing they were keeping the national spirit safe until the storm passed. They realized that the Nibene Valley is the heart of the empire and the cultural center of its civilization, but it is a fragile center that only can be held together by the strength of character of its emperor. When he falters, so do the Colovians. Yet, when he is mighty, like Tiber Septim, they are his legions. I think that's a really interesting contrast to the Nibenes of the East. I think that's a super cool kind of dichotomy they have going on between the Colovians and the Nibenes. And I like that when they determine that they don't like the Emperor or that he's not strong enough for them, they're like, okay, bye, and they just go. That's so funny. For Calovia, we'll begin in the west Weald, and we shall talk about the Strid River. Much fewer rivers in Calovia than in the Nibene Valley. The Strid River is one of the major rivers of Calovia, which flows along the border between the Siridil and Valenwood. It has a tributary which flows into the province of the Bosmer, and the source of the river is just south of the city of Skingrad. It flows to the west, passes Kvatch, and through the Gold Coast until it empties into the Abacian Sea. The strait has served as an amazing way for traders from the Abacian to reach the interior of Siridil. The trade between the Colovians and the Bosmer has historically taken place along the strait. The West Weald is a region known for its tomato farms and vineyards. It's open and made up of scattered forests, and known for its population of a specific species of bear called the West Weald bears. They're said to be some of the most dangerous animals in all of Cyrodiil to encounter. Within the West Weald is the county and city of Skingrad. Skingrad is an ancient Colovian city known for being a prime example of the Colovian virtues of independence, hard work, and tough-mindedness. The city lies on the Gold Road in the region of the West Weald between the Imperial City and Kvatch. Let me zoom in. There are 3 districts defining the city of Skingrad: the Castle, Chapel, and Hightown district. The guild halls are located in Hightown, along with many upper class homes and shops in the west of the city. soon it wasn't just distance and location that separated the Calothians from the Nibonese. It was their beliefs. With the rising of the Alessian order and the priesthood of Maruk in the east, in the west, they mostly still adhered to the temple Kvatch was almost entirely destroyed, it was restored to its former renown by 40171, the beginning of the Great War, and during that time, Kvatch was under Aldmiri control from 173 to 175 of the Fourth Era. By Fourth Era 201, its current state is unknown, but I hope that it's back to some kind of stability after all the hardships it has faced. I just wanted to mention the Imperial Reserve. It's a grassland said to be prime hunting ground, so grand that it was at one point reserved for either only the Emperor or nobility to hunt in. But by the Third and Fourth Era, there are very few settlements within this sub-region, and it's kind of known as a refuge for outlaws and Daedra worshippers. But I'm sure it's still a really great hunting ground if you're willing to take some risks. The next region is the Great Forest. The Great Forest, which kind of does one of these. It kind of surrounds this half of Lake Rumire, all the way down here. And I wanted to talk about the White Rose River a bit, which does look like it could be part of the Westweald, but again, no official borders. But let's talk about the White Rose River anyway. This river is the smallest and most strangely shaped river, in my opinion, in Siridil. It has two sources in the south of the Great Forest, or the Westweald, and flows north for a few short kilometers until it empties into Lake Rumire. An island is formed from the joining and splitting again of the river on its journey north. So I'm not sure why it's called the White Rose River. I'm assuming there must be some kind of white roses that maybe grow on the island or around its banks. Not sure. If you know, please tell me in the comments. Now I'm going to talk about Coral, so let me adjust the camera a bit. Coral. Coral is more of a town than a city, but significant enough to mark its own place on the map. It is, of course, a Colovian town, located on the west borders of Siridil. You can see Hammerfell is very, very close by. It is connected to the Red Ring Road by the Black Road, but it is also connected to the Orange Road, which again is the only road not directly connected to the Red Ring Road, as it only really leads between Coral and Bruma. Although it is a relatively small town, it has 5 districts. The first is Fountain Gate, which holds a fountain of Saint Oslo. She was against the walls of the city. Traveling to the east of Fountain Gate, one will find Castle Coral, and to the north, Great Oak Place, a fighter residential area, which also hosts the Fighters Guild and probably hosted the Mages Guild before its dissolution. Just outside the main city, probably around here somewhere, course home to the Chapel of Dibella. It is recognized as one of the most peaceful places within the city. Guildgate is the district home to the Guild's big surprise. It's probably the most illustrious district in Anvil. Lastly, the district of Harborside, where Anvil's famous harbor and lighthouse exist in the south. County Anvil has been ruled by the Umbranox line since the 3rd century of the Third Era. By this time, Anvil had fallen into squalor from the reign of Cameron Usurper, and the town came under the control of the Red Saber Pirates. Captain Toradon Abdougal was the leader of these pirates, and Vasil Umbranox was an Imperial Commodore who took control of the town around 3rd Era 267. The tension between the two forces grew and concluded in a naval battle in Anvil Bay. During this battle, the small, mostly wooden town of Anvil was burned down, and as Captain Dougal and his crew tried to flee, Umbranox's battle mages brought down an avalanche of rocks over their ship. Dougal and his crew fell under a curse and were trapped in a cave with no way of getting out. One by one, they all lost their minds, Dougal being the last to lose his sanity. They remained undead under the city of Anvil, but eventually they were put to rest when their tomb was discovered in the 3rd Era, 433. Umbranox was granted the title of Count of Anvil, and the finances to rebuild a new city, and his progeny went on to rule the city long after his death. In 335 of the 3rd Era, a rich imperial man named Logrin Benirus attempted to punish the people of Anvil, who he despised for shunning him, several